Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports. And in most of our videos, we cover a lot of uplifting stuff and a lot of, analytical coverage about the NBA draft, other NBA content, specifically focused in the present tense about content that is currently ongoing and stuff that's coming up in the near future. But this video is a little bit different. We're actually taking a flashback look at one of the teams that could have become one of the best teams in the league, but simply never did. We're going to talk about everything that went wrong, a lot of the stuff that went right, and specifically how I think this is a great example of how quickly things can change in the NBA. You look at certain dynasties, certain teams that either feel like they're knocking on the door, never get there, or maybe aren't knocking on the door and then all of a sudden they are there, and then maybe stuff goes wrong and they never actually fulfill their full potential. And this is the perfect video to cover all of that in, because we're talking about the team that never was. And from the thumbnail, the title, and also the opening graphic here, you can probably tell which team we're going to be talking about. And that's going to be the Portland Trail Blazers in the late 2000s, specifically around the time of 2007, up until about 2010. So it's definitely going to be an interesting video. If you guys do enjoy this content, make sure to leave a like. Maybe we'll incorporate more flashback type videos in the future if this is well received. So let me know in the comment section if you do enjoy this style content. Don't worry, we're going to keep the content very similar to all the other things you guys have already subscribed for. If you're not subscribed, do it now. Leave a like as well in today's video. And let's jump into it now with the Portland Trail Blazers and their core pieces around this time. At the time, they had their big three. That was including guard Brandon Roy, who was a multi-time All-NBA selection in his NBA career, forward LaMarcus Aldridge, who was a multi-time All-Star, and former #1 overall pick Greg Oden. Then in addition, right around that 2008 season, this was their roster. They had Travis Outlaw, who was a solid forward. Steve Blake, of course, notably played with Kobe Bryant. I actually met Steve Blake in real life. He's a really nice guy. And I think he was actually a pretty big part of this Blazers roster. And you look at Rudy Fernandez, another guy they took in the same draft as Greg Oden back in 2007. He obviously had a fairly nice career, although it was not super long. Definitely did have his impact in the league. Then you look at Nicolas Batum, who they drafted a year later and was a really great addition as well. Nicolas Batum has had a very nice extended career. And I think a lot of people forget how good he was with Portland, specifically more so as a playmaker. Actually had the ball in his hands a little bit more frequent. He was a player who, when he got his max contract with the Charlotte Hornets, that was fairly well recognized as a contract that was deserved at that point. Obviously, maybe didn't play up to that level in Charlotte, but since he's gotten back with the Clippers, we've seen how Batum can have an impact on winning, and he was definitely doing that with the Portland Trail Blazers. And then Joel Przybilla, one of the forgotten centers from the late 2000s, definitely had his own impact on this team, but unfortunately, which you'll find out a little bit more later on in this video, he had to play a little bit more than maybe the Blazers were hoping because of some catastrophic occurrences that really changed the outlook of this franchise. Then we look at Portland and how did this roster come to be, which I think is one of the more intriguing aspects. A lot of people know some of the story on what kind of happened with this team and why things didn't really pan out. But I love focusing on how this team was built, specifically when you look at the job that the executives, the front office did there for Portland at that time. It was a really great roster construction, honestly. And let's start with the 2006 draft, because that's really where the building started here for Portland. Second overall, they made a huge trade with the Chicago Bulls. They moved up from 4 to #2, and they acquired the draft rights to LaMarcus Aldridge from the Chicago Bulls. And then in that same night, that same draft night, which is going to show how crazy of an accomplishment this was for this franchise, in 2006, 6th overall pick, again, they trade up with the Minnesota Timberwolves. So they moved up twice in the draft already, and they go and get Brandon Roy in that deal. Obviously, this worked out extremely well for Portland. You're looking at two highly notable players. Brandon Roy became a multi-time All-NBA player. LaMarcus Aldridge has been selected to so many All-Star teams in his career. Both of those guys were massive home run selections and really outlined the future of this franchise. Brandon Roy was voted as Rookie of the Year after the 2006-2007 season. And Portland fans, I'm sure we're feeling so good about their roster. Of course, this is one of the teams I grew up watching. I was about 7 years old at the time of the 2006 NBA draft, so I wasn't quite evaluating prospects at that point, unfortunately. I'm hoping that I would have had high grades on both Aldridge and Brandon Roy, though. For this video, let's just say I did have high grades on them based on my track record, right? No, I'm just joking there a little bit. But then we get to the 2007 draft, and for the draft lottery, Kevin Pritchard, their GM at the time, their executive, who, is already building this thing up, he pleaded with Brandon Roy to be the draft lottery representative for the Portland Trailblazers. Even though Roy was a little reluctant at first, according to a lot of reports, Brandon Roy ultimately leaned into Kevin Pritchard's wishes here and represented the Portland Trailblazers at the draft lottery. This team won about 32 games the year before, and the ping pong balls fell right for Portland. They got the first overall pick in a year with two really great top end talents at the very top. Those two, of course, being Greg Oden and Kevin Durant. Then, first overall, the Blazers make a key decision for their franchise, and one that you cannot blame them for. They draft Greg Oden first overall. And then in the 2008 draft, just to cap it all off, of course, in 2007, they also did draft Rudy Fernandez. But in 2008, 25th overall, they make another trade, this time with the Houston Rockets, and acquire the draft rights to Nicolas Batum. Another great steal here by Kevin Pritchard. And you look at the construction of this roster, 3 really great drafts back to back, including Rudy Fernandez in 2007. And had everything played out with Greg Oden correctly, it would have been a phenomenal draft still that night. We're going to talk about how everything kind of unfolded from here, though. And this is where they became the team that never really was what they could have been. So looking at the Oden selection, because I think that's the one that really catches a lot of flack, he was drafted first overall, and one pick later, the Seattle Supersonics at the time select Kevin Durant, where he would play his rookie season there in Seattle. Of course, had a phenomenal rookie year, and then they relocated to OKC, and the rest is history there. We know how great Kevin Durant is as a player. He's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. He's an MVP, multi-time finals MVP, and one of the best players to ever play the game of basketball, realistically. But at the time, the consensus number 1 pick was Greg Oden. Pretty much everybody believed Greg Oden was worthy of the number 1 overall selection. Colin Cowherd himself even said that Kevin Durant was, quote unquote, just another wing. Obviously a terrible take there. But then here's some writing from some people who were covering the NBA draft at that time. Of course, again, I was a little too young to actually be covering the NBA draft. Otherwise, I would be filling this in with my own analysis at the time. But one take here was, and I believe this was from a BR writer, Greg Oden was an obvious pick that takes the team's potential to a whole new level. And then they go on to talk about Rudy Fernandez as well. And then Jonathan Givony, the founder of Draft Express, someone who I respect fairly well. I think he's a decent draft evaluator. He says, for the second straight year, they were bold and aggressive. Oden was the safe and logical pick at number 1. And I think that goes to show kind of what the feel in the room was at the time. Coming out of Ohio State, Greg Oden was looked at as the legitimate number 1 prospect in that class above Kevin Durant. It wasn't just the Portland Trailblazers missing on a pick here. Everyone at the time, draft evaluators, the media, NBA fans, everyone believed Greg Oden was worthy of the first overall pick. They believed he was the safe number 1 overall pick, and we'll know how that all played out from there. Because the start of Oden's career, he missed the entire first year he was in the league, the 2007-2008 season. Greg Oden did not play 1 second of NBA basketball. He missed the entire season with a season-ending microfracture right knee injury. He had surgery on that and missed the entire year. And I think that really set up the tone for what Greg Oden's career was going to play out as, because in the next year, in 2008-2009, he actually played 61 games, which is a pretty significant number for him. Obviously, we have hindsight. We know that Greg Oden did not play a ton of NBA games in his career, but in only 21.5 minutes per game, perhaps the earliest edition of load management we had ever seen, Oden averaged almost 9 points a game, which I know isn't lighting the world on fire, but remember, 21.5 minutes, that's pretty good. Then you're looking at 7 rebounds a game, which is phenomenal in 21 minutes. That would be about the equivalent of 14 to 15 rebounds a game per 36 minutes. Half an assist a game, nothing crazy there. 0.4 steals per game, but a very notable 1.1 blocks per game. He was starting to light the world on fire, specifically on the defensive end of the floor, and Portland took a massive step forward his rookie season here in 2008-2009 because of his performance alongside Brandon Roy and LaMarcus Aldridge. It was very notable that the team was just simply way better with Greg Oden on the floor than they were with him off the floor. Then 2009-2010 season, the nightmare sets back in. He was having a great year early in the season in 23.9 minutes a game. Again, a little bit of load management here, trying to get his endurance back, trying to keep him healthy. Oden, his points per game increased to over 11 points a game, 8.5 rebounds a game, which is again very substantial for the minutes, 1 assist a game roughly, again about a half steal per game, but 2.3 blocks per game in 23 minutes. That is defensive player of the year type numbers, and he was doing it in under 25 minutes a night. That is incredible. And look at the efficiency here, shooting over 60% from the field and 77% from the free throw line. He was a legitimate great player in his early career. Within the first 82 games of his season, of his career, 61 in 2008-2009 and 21 in 2009-2010, he was playing great basketball. And then disaster sets in here. He fractured his left patella. He got stretchered off the court, and that would be the final game he played as a Portland Trailblazer. And when we look at Oden's impact on this team, when Oden played with the Portland Trailblazers, the team won 64.5% of their games. Roughly, that is good for about 51 to 52 wins a season at that win percentage, which is really, really good, obviously. And when you look at when he played alongside simply Brandon Roy and LaMarcus Aldridge, when the trio was all together, the team went 52-10 in those 2 seasons. Of course, unfortunately for them, they only played 62 total games together for their entire career, but that's a win percentage of nearly 84%. They would on average win about 65 games a year or so when all 3 would play. And that's scary because the thing about this is they didn't even have their chemistry yet. You know, they're starting to play together for the first time in their career. They played a total of 62 games together. This is very similar to the win percentage we saw from the Brooklyn Nets in the very small sample size when Harden, Durant, and Kyrie all played together. And perhaps Portland could have been that special of a team because all of these guys were in their mid to early 20s, which is scary. That would have been scary hours for the NBA had Portland stayed healthy, but unfortunately, we know they did not. They were injury riddled. Brandon Roy had a pair of serious knee injuries as well, and he retired at the age of 27 after being a 2-time All-NBA selection, which designates you as a top 15 player in the world. And then by the start of the 2011 season, neither Oden, nor Roy would ever play another game for the Portland Trailblazers, which goes to show how quickly something can change. I'm sure Blazers fans at the time were saying, if we can stay healthy, we're going to be the best young dynasty in the NBA. And it never came to fruition simply because of knee injuries for both Greg Oden and Brandon Roy. We both know that LaMarcus Aldridge went on to have a great career with the Blazers before ultimately signing with the San Antonio Spurs in free agency quite a few years later. But unfortunately for Portland, the Roy-Oden duo never played itself into fruition due to those catastrophic knee injuries. And the rest is history. The Trailblazers' future went from incredibly bright with 3 young stars who were going to light the league on fire to broken, shattered, and disastrous. Of course, many people wonder, what if Portland did take Kevin Durant? How different would the NBA be? How different would Portland be? Would Portland have won a championship with Aldridge and Durant, and maybe even Aldridge, Durant, and Roy early while Roy was still healthy? Potentially. We'll never really know what they would have been able to do. And if it was a simulation, if we could run this back 20 times, maybe Oden stays healthy, maybe Roy stays healthy, and then perhaps the Portland Trailblazers end up becoming a dynasty. We don't really know, which is what makes this so interesting to me, because realistically, you look at a lot of teams right now and you might say, wow, this team's so set up well for the future, and then 1 or 2 things catastrophically go disastrous and your team's franchise gets altered forever. Of course, Portland rebounded really well with the Damian Lillard selection after trading away Gerald Wallace in a deal that really gave them that selection. And Portland, they've been a good team in the last decade. So it's not like this really hindered their franchise, but you just have to wonder what could have been had everyone stayed healthy. Hopefully you guys did enjoy today's video. Again, a very different style video, perhaps not as long as some of the other videos on the channel, but I do think it was a lot of fun to look back at Portland, give a brief history of what this team maybe could have been with the young trio of Aldridge, a great post scorer, Oden, who was a dominant defensive big, and Brandon Roy, who was lighting the league on fire with his shot creation potential. So if you did enjoy, leave a like, subscribe to the channel as well. Give me some other ideas for other content you'd like to see on the channel as well in the comment section. Again, hopefully you guys did enjoy. It was a lot of fun to record, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.